listener production.
Hi, Natasha Belling with you and welcome to the afternoon edition of The Briefing. Coming up in our deep dive, just what is going on in the Middle East? The US President Donald Trump proudly announced a ceasefire today between Israel and Iran, which was then denied by Iran. The crisis is changing by the second. We unpack the latest developments and whether this ceasefire could be a critical breakthrough in the escalating crisis. But first, let's check the afternoon headlines this Tuesday, the 24th of June. Despite the US president's promises of a ceasefire between Israel and Iran, the missile attacks are continuing. Mr. Trump announced earlier today on social media, quote, "Congratulations to everyone. It has been fully agreed by and between Israel and Iran that there will be a complete and total ceasefire." Adding, "God bless Israel, God bless Iran, God bless the Middle East, God bless the United States of America, and God bless the world." Just hours after that announcement, the Iranian foreign minister denied an agreement had been reached. Then, in another development, there are reports Iranian state television has announced a ceasefire with Israel had begun. Our Prime Minister Anthony Albanese, one of the many world leaders, praising this apparent breakthrough.
Well, what we want to see is the ceasefire announced by President Trump implemented. We think that we do want to see dialogue and diplomacy replace any escalation. And President Trump's announcement, we very much welcome.
In other news this Tuesday, two of Australia's biggest states have handed down their budgets with promises of cost of living relief. Both have announced budget deficits. Queensland was $8.6 billion for this financial year and New South Wales $5.7 billion. The New South Wales Treasurer has promised to fast-track housing projects and a landmark child protection package to try and rebuild the out-of-home care system. Meantime, the Queensland Treasurer has announced an $18.5 billion boost over 5 years to try and rescue hospitals. And billionaire Amazon boss Jeff Bezos has had to move venues for his multi-million-dollar wedding in Venice because of growing protests. The 61-year-old is set to tie the knot with Lauren Sanchez in a lavish week-long event estimated to cost around $20 million. Demonstrators, including Greenpeace activists, unfurled a huge banner in Venice's St Mark's Square saying, "If you can rent Venice for your wedding, you can pay more tax."
The problem is not the wedding. The problem is the system. One big billionaire can't rent a city for his pleasure.
The Venice Tourism Council, though, has lashed out at the protesters, saying the city is honoured to host the private event and the objections do not represent the spirit of Venice and they reflect little more than social envy. Now it's time to get into our deep dive on the apparent ceasefire announced by Donald Trump between Israel and Iran. Leading defence and security expert Michael Shoebridge is hopeful the truce will stand, but he argues there are many questions left unanswered for long-term peace in the Middle East and Australia's ongoing defence and trade partnership with an America first Donald Trump. Michael, thank you so much for joining us. This crisis in the Middle East is literally changing by the minute before our very eyes. Can I ask you, what is going on in the Middle East and who is telling the truth?
Well, I think the truth has been imposed on Israel and Iran. So Donald Trump announces seemingly out of the blue earlier today that a total ceasefire, a complete ceasefire has been agreed with Israel and Iran, and it'll take effect almost immediately. The immediate reaction from Iran is, I don't know what you're talking about. There's silence from Israel. But over the next few hours, it looks like that might be coming true. So a ceasefire looks like it's starting to take effect, even though both Israel and Iran are still trading strikes.
So in regards to that, Michael, this ceasefire is apparently happening. That may indicate there is some type of negotiation happening between Israel, Iran, and of course the US is in the middle of all of this, especially backing Israel. In regards to the chance of a real ceasefire, as in the missile attacks stop, what is the chance of that?
I think it looks pretty high. I think this looks a little bit like what we've seen between Israel and the Lebanese-based Hezbollah, a very powerful Iranian proxy with huge numbers of rockets and missiles. That ceasefire was put in place in similar shaky circumstances, and there have been breaches, but it's been holding. I think that's what we'll see here. And there's some good reasons for that.
So is this, would you argue, a victory then for Donald Trump?
Well, yes, it looks that way. It looks like those US strikes on the weekend against Iran's nuclear facilities really created the conditions for the Iranians to realise this wasn't working for them. And I think the flip side is the Israelis have achieved pretty much everything they wanted, particularly now that the US has struck those heavily buried underground nuclear facilities. So the Iranians want it to stop, and they think it's only going to get worse for them from here. And the Israelis have pretty much achieved their objectives. But there are some enormous loose ends, like where is the highly enriched uranium, for example?
You make a great point there, Michael. These are all the questions that still haven't been answered. What happens with the Iranian regime? What happens with, the Iranian authorities are claiming that they actually moved all of the nuclear capability and their firepower actually before the US hit these areas with their missile strikes. So who do we believe here? Has it really been a success, the US mission?
Well, I think from the early satellite photos of the damage to the three facilities in Esfahan, Natanz, and that one under the mountain in Fordo, it looks like there was pretty comprehensive structural damage to all three, but that doesn't mean all of the equipment and facilities have been destroyed. So I think those very grand claims about total obliteration that we heard from Donald Trump are probably overstated, but there's been a lot of structural and facility damage. The Iranians would say that they were so clever they moved everything out of the facilities and they've put the material in different places. They've been telling their people throughout this conflict that they've been winning, which from any outside observer just doesn't look right. However, it is quite likely they could have moved the enriched uranium. It's about 400 kilograms of stuff. You can fit it in the boots of several cars, and then you can disperse it. That is going to be a real thing about what's the detail of this ceasefire. Does it open up Iran to the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, again for inspections and verification? Who goes on the ground to see what the state of play is?
And Michael, in regards to watching our government's response, Mr Albanese and our Foreign Minister Penny Wong, it's been really interesting to watch the body language, how they've handled the US striking Iran and then this possible ceasefire. We've heard time and time again three key words from the Prime Minister and the Foreign Minister: diplomacy, dialogue and de-escalation. What are your thoughts on how our governments responded to this?
Well, I think those words have meaning now, but they really were comprehensively irrelevant and out of touch for the last few weeks. What we've seen is an active military conflict between Israel and Iran. Neither of those countries had any inclination to diplomacy, de-escalation or dialogue. They were in the middle of an armed conflict. And then America also was interested in the use of military force. It's only through that it's created the conditions where diplomacy, de-escalation and dialogue can happen. So no doubt we'll hear from the government how wise they were to push for this, but really they've been bystanders with very little comprehension of what was happening. The other disturbing thing for me is we've had thousands of Australians in that part of the world in quite vulnerable locations, and we put more military people into our key base there. But the Prime Minister yesterday was talking like it was all so far away, it didn't matter to Australia. I bet it mattered to all those Australians that were there.
So what do you think the federal government should have done, Michael?
Well, I think they maybe should have taken seriously what the Israelis were doing and the prospects of either Israeli or US military action against Iran's nuclear facilities. This has been a problem the world's been looking at for almost 50 years. And Trump was signalling he was going to do something about it. And if he didn't, Netanyahu in Israel was going to do something about it. So we just looked like we were behind the curve. And I would be very surprised if the national security institutions in Canberra weren't briefing the Prime Minister and ministers more effectively, but it didn't show.
Michael, in regards to our alliance, we know now there is a lot of water under the bridge, especially with AUKUS, and our defence and security alliance with the US. How do you think these latest developments play out for us? Do you think the US is a great ally, or do you think that alliance is forever broken and forever changed?
Well, I think it's changed. And I think the idea that Trump hasn't changed America and all the millions of Americans that elected Trump aren't changing America is wrong. And the idea that after Trump's period in office, it'll be the America we've known for decades is also wrong. So we're dealing with a changed America, and it's a much more unpredictable, more demanding ally than we've experienced for decades. We haven't come to terms with that. And I think a real problem for our government is they look like their policy on China is fundamentally different to the American approach, which sees it as a primary security problem. And also on the Middle East, the government really has stepped away from long-held positions that lined up with American positions on Israel, for example. That's why it looked so awkward when these strikes started to happen. So we've got what used to be two governments that were deeply aligned, which made the alliance and things like the AUKUS submarine program work, that are now drifting. And yet we're pretending that isn't happening.
So in regards to our defence and our security and our protections moving forward, Michael, you know very well, as the rest of the world does, Donald Trump is certainly America first, second and third. Do we need to start, our government needs to start viewing Australia in the same way to make sure that we are adequately protected?
Well, I think we do have to take our own security and defence much more seriously than we have for years. We really have been a free rider on American military power, and we thought that that was absolutely reliable and predictable. Well, that's not true anymore. America helps those who have some capacity to do a lot for themselves. And frankly, with the amount that we're spending on defence and what we're spending it on, we can do very little for ourselves. So we can talk all we like about an independent foreign policy and fighting our security in and with Asia, not with America. But all of that is just idle words unless we spend the money and start building an independent military, which we don't have.
We really appreciate your analysis and your thoughts today. Thank you so much, Michael.
Thanks, Natasha.
That was Defence and Security expert Michael Shoebridge. And that's it for this episode of the afternoon edition of The Briefing. We'd love you to subscribe or follow us on Instagram at The Briefing Podcast. I'm Natasha Belling. Thanks for your company.